What was the mark that God placed on Cain, and why has it remained one of the Bible's greatest mysteries? For thousands of years, scholars and believers have pondered its true nature. Could it have been more than just a visible sign? Or did it carry a deeper, spiritual significance beyond what our eyes can see? The mystery of the mark of Cain has intrigued countless generations, inviting speculation about its true form and purpose. It's a biblical enigma that even today continues to spark curiosity and debate. When Cain murdered his brother Abel, he became the first human to commit murder, and his life changed forever. As a consequence, God placed a mark on him to prevent others from seeking revenge and taking his life. But the Bible leaves us with a burning question. What exactly was this mark? The text doesn't provide a detailed description, leaving the true nature of the mark of Cain shrouded in mystery. Was it a visible sign that people could see from afar, or was it something more subtle, like a shift in Cain's demeanor that set him apart? The lack of specifics only adds to the intrigue, making the mark of Cain one of the most debated and enigmatic aspects of biblical history. Adding to the complexity, the mark wasn't merely a punishment, but also a form of divine protection. This combination of justice and mercy is unique, as it shows God's intention to ensure Cain's survival despite his crime. While God had every right to enact harsh retribution, he instead placed a protective sign on Cain, almost as if to give him a second chance at life. Yet this raises even more questions. Why protect someone guilty of such a heinous act? And why choose to do so through a mark whose nature remains unspecified? Throughout history, scholars and theologians have struggled to understand what form this mark might have taken. Some ancient Jewish traditions suggest it could have been a physical change, like a scar or a unique feature, while others believe it was more symbolic, perhaps an aura or a spiritual presence that surrounded Cain. Even early Christian writings explored these possibilities, often leaving room for different interpretations, which only adds layers to the mystery. Was the mark something that made Cain stand out visibly, or did it serve as an inner reminder of his guilt and the mercy shown to him? The implications of the mark of Cain extend beyond Cain himself, affecting humanity's perception of justice and divine intervention. Could it be that this mark serves as a broader metaphor for the consequences of sin and the nature of divine grace? If so, what does this signify about God's approach to justice, balancing punishment with protection? It challenges the simple notions of right and wrong, inviting us to ponder the complex interplay of guilt, accountability, and redemption. Adding to the puzzle, many cultural and historical interpretations have tried to decode the significance of the mark. Some have suggested that it was an outward blemish designed to warn others of Cain's guilt and deter any acts of vengeance. Others propose that the mark was more abstract, possibly an invisible spiritual sign that people could only perceive through a sense of dread or unease when they encountered Cain. These interpretations span centuries and various cultures, each adding a piece to the mystery but never fully solving it. Moreover, the mark of Cain has often been tied to broader themes within the Bible, especially the nature of human sin and divine justice. Cain's mark stands as a contrast to his brother Abel's blood, which cried out from the ground for justice. While Abel was vindicated through his death, Cain was left to walk the earth as a marked man, forever bearing the weight of his crime. This dynamic between Abel's justice and Cain's mark of mercy continues to fuel debates about what exactly the mark represented and whether it was a blessing or a curse. Even among different religious traditions, the understanding of the mark of Cain varies significantly. Some see it as an act of divine mercy, a symbol of God's reluctance to destroy even the most sinful. Others interpret it as a curse that set Cain apart as a perpetual reminder of his wrongdoing. The tension between these perspectives mirrors the broader theological debate about the nature of God's justice. Is it more focused on punishment or on giving sinners a chance for redemption? The ambiguity surrounding the mark also invites us to consider the emotional and psychological burden carried by Cain himself. Bearing such a sign, visible or not, would inevitably shape his existence. Did the mark cause him to live in constant fear of being recognized and confronted? Or did it serve as a constant reminder of his actions, shaping his outlook on life and his relationship with God? These questions go beyond the physical nature of the mark, touching on deeper spiritual and existential themes. As scholars continue to explore various theories, one thing remains clear: the mark of Cain is more than just a symbol. It is a narrative device that challenges us to think critically about divine justice. Was it a form of branding, a scarlet letter that marked Cain as a transgressor? Or was it something deeper, a protective charm that underscored God's mercy even in the face of great sin? The answers may not be definitive, but the questions themselves are crucial to understanding the broader message. Throughout history, there have been many attempts to decipher the nature of the mark of Cain, each theory adding its own twist to the mystery. Some ancient Jewish sources suggested that the mark was a physical blemish, perhaps a scar or a unique facial feature that distinguished Cain from others. This idea aligns with the concept of a visible sign intended to prevent vengeance against him. But even if this theory holds, questions remain. Why would God choose a physical change as the mark, and how would it have functioned to deter others from harming him? Others have speculated that the mark might not have been a physical sign at all, but rather a spiritual or supernatural phenomenon. Some rabbinic traditions propose that it was an aura or a divine light that surrounded Cain, signaling God's protection in a way that could be sensed but not seen. This perspective suggests that the mark was a spiritual shield, not only sparing Cain from physical harm, but also serving as a constant reminder of the divine judgment he carried. If the mark was indeed a spiritual sign, what kind of message was it intended to convey to those who encountered him? Another interpretation considers the possibility that the mark was symbolic, representing a change in Cain's demeanor or behavior. Some scholars propose that the mark might have manifested as a visible expression of his guilt, perhaps through an unsettling presence or an aura of dread. This idea aligns with the notion that the mark wasn't just about protecting Cain from others, but also about marking him as a living testament to the consequences of his actions. In this sense, the mark was less about appearance and more about the atmosphere that surrounded him, influencing how others perceived him. Interestingly, some early Christian writings even suggest that the mark could have been a form of divine tattoo or inscription placed upon Cain's body. This idea stems from a belief in the ancient world that markings on the body could carry spiritual significance, serving as either protection or a curse. If the mark of Cain was indeed a form of divine inscription, it would not only symbolize his guilt, but also serve as a permanent reminder of God's mercy. However, this raises more questions. What kind of message would a divine tattoo convey? And would it have been something that others could read or understand? Adding another layer to the discussion, the mark of Cain has also been interpreted through a more psychological lens. Some suggest that the mark was not an external sign, but an internal transformation, a shift in Cain's mindset and perception of the world around him. This would imply that the mark was a change in his character or soul, a deep inner scar that affected his interactions with others. In this view, the mark functioned as an invisible barrier that set Cain apart, not through a physical sign, but through the way he was perceived and treated by society. A particularly intriguing theory posits that the mark was an ancient form of protective charm or amulet given by God. In this context, the mark would have been a sacred object or item worn by Cain, believed to carry divine power that protected him from harm. This theory aligns with ancient practices of using charms for protection and reflects the belief that God could endow objects with supernatural qualities. If the mark was indeed an amulet, what kind of significance would such a protective charm carry in a biblical context, and how would it influence our understanding of Cain's story? In addition to these interpretations, the mark of Cain has also been viewed as a metaphor for the human condition, specifically the struggle between sin and redemption. In this sense, the mark becomes a representation of the consequences of sin, serving as a reminder that even in the face of wrongdoing, there is an opportunity for mercy. This symbolic understanding challenges the idea of the mark as a mere punishment and opens the door to viewing it as a broader statement on divine justice. Exploring historical and cultural perspectives on the mark of Cain reveals the depth and complexity of this biblical mystery. From ancient Jewish commentaries to modern theological debates, each theory provides a new lens through which to view the enigmatic mark. While some interpretations focus on physical manifestations, others delve into spiritual and psychological realms, suggesting that the true nature of the mark could transcend a single explanation. Could it be that the mark was intended to be multifaceted, serving both as a literal sign and a symbolic message? As we sift through these various interpretations, the question remains: what was God's true intention behind the mark? Was it meant to be a deterrent to violence, a signal of divine mercy, or a symbol of the weight of sin that Cain carried? Perhaps it was a combination of all these elements designed to provoke thought and contemplation. The uncertainty surrounding the mark of Cain may not be a barrier to understanding, but rather an invitation to explore deeper spiritual truths about justice, protection, and divine intervention. The mark of Cain is often perceived as a physical sign, but some scholars have explored the idea that the mark was not visible at all. Could it be that the true nature of the mark lay in a transformation within Cain himself? Some ancient sources suggest that the mark was a radical shift in Cain's presence or demeanor, creating an aura of fear or guilt that people instinctively recognized. This twist in the interpretation challenges us to look beyond outward appearances and consider the psychological and spiritual dimensions of the mark. Adding to the mystery, certain interpretations propose that the mark was a form of spiritual affliction or curse, rather than a physical attribute. According to this perspective, the mark might have represented an ongoing burden on Cain's soul, manifesting as a deep inner turmoil or relentless sense of guilt. If this theory holds, then the mark was not just a deterrent to physical harm, but a constant reminder to Cain of the consequences of his actions. This inner struggle could have been as powerful and real as any external mark, leaving an indelible impression on his very being. Interestingly, there are also accounts suggesting that the mark was not a punishment at all, but a form of divine protection that carried a hidden blessing. In this scenario, the mark was a protective seal placed by God, ensuring that Cain could not be killed by those seeking vengeance. This interpretation flips the traditional view on its head, presenting the mark not as a curse, but as an act of divine mercy. Could it be that the mark was a means of shielding Cain, allowing him to live out his days while grappling with the moral weight of his crime? One of the more controversial twists comes from interpretations that suggest the mark may have been associated with a change in Cain's physical characteristics. Some ancient Jewish writings hint that the mark could have altered his appearance in a way that was not immediately recognizable as a punishment, but still set him apart. Perhaps it made him appear larger, stronger, or even otherworldly in some fashion, creating a sense of fear or awe in those who encountered him. If true, this would mean that the mark not only affected Cain's fate, but also his entire presence in the world. There is also the theory that the mark was symbolic rather than literal, representing a change in the way people treated Cain. Some theologians argue that the mark might have been a signal of Cain's change in status, a shift from being just another man to a figure marked by God's judgment. This change would have influenced how others viewed him, treating him with a mix of fear, respect, or even pity. In this view, the mark was not something visible on his body, but rather a shift in his social identity, fundamentally altering his interactions with others. A compelling twist involves the possibility that the mark of Cain had a connection to the spiritual realm, serving as a form of spiritual protection or warning to unseen forces. In this scenario, the mark was a sign not just to other people, but also to spiritual beings, indicating that Cain was under God's watch. This notion introduces a supernatural aspect to the story, suggesting that the mark carried significance not only in the physical world, but in the spiritual realm as well. It raises the question of whether the mark had a dual purpose, protecting Cain from human vengeance and from spiritual harm. Some interpretations also suggest that the mark of Cain was not a single event, but a process, a transformation that occurred gradually over time. In this view, the mark may have initially been a physical sign that eventually became more abstract, evolving into a psychological or spiritual state. This progressive transformation could reflect the ongoing consequences of Cain's actions, suggesting that the mark's nature changed as he continued to live with the weight of his crime. Could it be that the mark was dynamic, representing different aspects of Cain's life at various stages? There is a less explored yet intriguing theory that connects the mark of Cain to ancient practices involving protective tattoos or inscriptions. In some cultures, tattoos were believed to have spiritual significance, acting as charms or symbols of divine protection. If the mark of Cain was indeed a form of sacred inscription, it might have served as a visible reminder of God's mercy, as well as a deterrent against harm. However, this theory also raises questions about the role of such symbols in biblical tradition and whether they align with the message of the text. Another surprising twist is the idea that the mark was linked to a vow or covenant made between Cain and God. This covenant would signify an agreement where Cain accepted God's judgment and protection in exchange for living with the consequences of his actions. If this interpretation holds, then the mark was not just a physical or spiritual sign, but a binding agreement that defined Cain's relationship with God from that point forward. Such a covenant could add a new dimension to the story, making the mark an act of divine diplomacy as much as it was a sign. Some argue that the true significance of the mark of Cain lies not in understanding its nature, but in contemplating its implications. The mark's mystery invites readers to ponder the themes of justice, mercy, and redemption in the context of human sin. Whether physical, spiritual, or symbolic, the mark represents the tension between divine judgment and forgiveness, challenging us to reflect on our own lives. It prompts a deeper consideration of how God balances punishment with mercy and how these themes play out in our everyday experiences. The mark of Cain remains an enigma, but despite the mystery surrounding its exact nature, one thing is clear: its purpose served a dual function. While the mark was a consequence of Cain's sin, it also acted as a protective measure, ensuring that he would not be killed in retaliation. This paradoxical combination of judgment and mercy lies at the heart of the story, inviting us to explore the deeper implications of what it means for God to extend both punishment and protection simultaneously. It's a reminder that God's actions often carry layered meanings, blending justice with compassion in unexpected ways. The protective aspect of the mark has led many to suggest that it was a divine seal, akin to a safeguard placed upon Cain to prevent anyone from taking vengeance into their own hands. In a society where an eye for an eye was the norm, God's intervention was radical. It broke the cycle of violence, granting Cain an opportunity to live out the consequences of his actions without being subjected to the same fate he had inflicted on his brother. This twist on justice challenges the conventional wisdom of retribution, hinting at a higher form of divine justice that extends beyond human understanding. In the context of ancient culture, where physical markings often carried significant meaning, the mark of Cain could symbolize a deeper spiritual reality. If we view the mark as a sign of divine ownership or even a scar on Cain's soul, it might signify a transformation within him, an inner change that reflected the gravity of his crime. This interpretation shifts the focus from the mark as merely an external deterrent to a sign that Cain himself was irrevocably altered, bearing the weight of his guilt as a constant reminder. It's a thought-provoking idea that suggests our actions can leave lasting marks on our spirits. The story also invites us to consider whether the mark had a broader, more symbolic significance in the narrative of Genesis. In many ways, the mark of Cain can be seen as a representation of the consequences of humanity's fall, highlighting the cycle of sin and the need for divine intervention. It reminds us that while sin leads to consequences, God's mercy creates space for redemption and transformation. This dual nature of the mark serves as a bridge between judgment and grace, showing that even in punishment, there is an element of hope and restoration. Moreover, the fact that God marked Cain after his confession of guilt raises questions about the relationship between repentance and divine protection. Although Cain's remorse did not erase the consequences of his actions, it appears that his acknowledgement of wrongdoing played a role in God's decision to shield him from harm. This suggests that the mark may have served as both a punishment and a symbol of God's readiness to protect even the fallen. It challenges us to reflect on the idea that God's grace is available even in the aftermath of our mistakes, offering a path forward despite the shadows of our past. The mark of Cain also serves as a narrative device that adds complexity to the portrayal of God's justice. It's not just about punishing the sinner, but about addressing the root causes of violence and breaking the cycle of vengeance. By sparing Cain's life and marking him, God intervenes in a way that prevents further bloodshed, setting a precedent for a different approach to justice. This notion that divine justice encompasses more than mere retribution speaks to a profound understanding of mercy that balances the scales without perpetuating violence. While the mark's physical appearance remains unknown, its impact on Cain's life was profound. He was cast away from his homeland, destined to wander, yet shielded from those who might wish to kill him. This paradoxical existence, where he was both protected and exiled, reflects the duality of the human experience, caught between grace and judgment, struggling with the consequences of one's actions while also being offered a second chance. It's a powerful reminder that even when we are marked by our past, God provides the possibility of redemption. Interpreting the mark as a protective measure rather than solely a curse can shift our perspective on the story of Cain. If the mark was intended to shield him, it implies that God's ultimate goal was not merely to punish, but to preserve life and offer a space for reflection and growth. This view aligns with the broader biblical narrative, where God continually seeks to restore fallen humanity. In this light, the mark becomes a sign of hope as much as it is a symbol of sin, inviting us to reconsider how we view divine justice. The mark of Cain, in its ambiguity, serves to provoke deeper questions about morality, justice, and the human condition. It challenges us to think about how we deal with our own transgressions and how we respond to the failings of others. Should we seek retribution? Or should we look for ways to extend grace while still holding each other accountable? This tension between judgment and mercy, embodied in the mark, continues to resonate with us today as we navigate the complexities of justice in our own lives. Ultimately, the mark of Cain is a reminder that God's ways are not our ways. The mark may never be fully understood, but its presence in the story of Cain invites us to look beyond outward appearances and consider the spiritual realities that shape our lives. It prompts us to reflect on the nature of sin and grace, reminding us that even in the midst of our failures, God's hand remains extended, offering a path back to Him. The story of Cain and the mysterious mark placed upon him is more than just a narrative of sin and consequence. It is a profound exploration of God's justice and mercy. While the specifics of the mark of Cain remain hidden, the spiritual truths it conveys are clear. It serves as a reminder that even when we fall short, God's grace is available, offering protection and the chance to reflect on our actions. The mark wasn't just a punishment, but a sign that even in judgment, God extends a hand of mercy, preventing Cain's life from being taken in retribution. Cain's experience challenges us to think about how God responds to our own mistakes. We often view punishment as a final verdict, but the mark of Cain suggests that God's approach is far more nuanced. While there are consequences for wrongdoing, His ultimate goal seems to be reconciliation rather than mere retribution. This invites us to reconsider how we perceive divine justice, not as a harsh decree, but as a balanced act of discipline and grace, aimed at guiding us toward transformation. The mark also raises questions about the nature of guilt and repentance. Although Cain expressed fear for his life, there's no indication that he truly repented for his sin. Yet God still chose to protect him. This suggests that God's mercy isn't contingent upon our perfect repentance, but extends even when we're still struggling with the weight of our choices. It highlights the depth of God's compassion, reaching out to protect even those who may not fully grasp the consequences of their actions. In a broader sense, the mark of Cain serves as a symbol of humanity's struggle with sin and the need for divine intervention. Just as Cain was marked and sent away, we too bear the marks of our own transgressions. Yet the story doesn't end there. God's willingness to shield Cain from harm demonstrates His desire to offer a path to redemption, even for those who have strayed far from His will. It's a powerful illustration that no matter how deeply we fall, God's grace can still find us. The ambiguity surrounding the mark allows us to reflect on the nature of visible and invisible scars in our lives. While Cain's mark might have been a physical sign, many of our marks are internal, wounds left by past mistakes, regrets, and fears. The story encourages us to acknowledge these scars, not as symbols of shame, but as reminders of God's ongoing work in our lives. Like Cain, we may carry the weight of our past, but we are also under God's protection, continually invited to grow and change. Furthermore, the story invites us to consider how we respond to others who are marked by their own sins and failures. It's easy to judge or cast them aside, but the mark of Cain challenges us to look deeper. If God could extend mercy to someone as flawed as Cain, then perhaps we too are called to show compassion even when it seems undeserved. The mark becomes a call to embody God's balance of justice and grace, recognizing that true change often begins with a second chance. The mark of Cain also touches upon the idea of consequences as a tool for growth. While Cain was not allowed to escape the results of his actions, the mark offered him a chance to live with his choices and, potentially, learn from them. It's a reminder that God doesn't always remove the difficulties we face, but may instead use them to teach us valuable lessons. In this light, the mark serves as a catalyst for personal development, prompting us to reflect on our behavior and its impact on others. From a spiritual perspective, the story of Cain challenges us to confront our own dark tendencies and the choices we make. The mark, though shrouded in mystery, symbolizes the reality of living with the consequences of sin. Yet it also points to God's willingness to intervene and offer a measure of protection even when we've gone astray. It's a narrative that speaks to the human condition, our struggle with right and wrong, the weight of our actions, and the enduring hope of redemption. In considering the mark of Cain, we're reminded that God's judgments are never one-dimensional. The mark wasn't just about isolating Cain, but also about preventing further harm. It shows us that God's justice includes not only addressing wrongdoing, but also protecting life, offering a chance for healing and reflection. This duality challenges us to adopt a more comprehensive view of divine justice, one that encompasses both accountability and restoration. The spiritual lesson here is clear. While the specifics of the mark may elude us, its meaning does not. It points to a God who is both just and merciful, who disciplines but also preserves, and who marks not to condemn, but to protect. In this way, the mark of Cain serves as a timeless reminder that God's ways are higher than our own, inviting us to trust in His wisdom, even when we don't fully understand. The mystery of the mark of Cain continues to spark curiosity and debate, leaving us to wonder what was its true nature and what deeper lessons does it hold for us today. While the Bible may not provide a clear answer, the story serves as a powerful reminder that God's justice and mercy are often intertwined in ways we may not expect. The mark wasn't just a consequence, it was a symbol of God's enduring protection, even when we fall short. It challenges us to look beyond outward appearances and consider the deeper spiritual truths in our own lives. Have you ever thought about the marks you carry, visible or not? What do they signify, and how do they shape your walk with God? Sometimes the scars we bear tell a story not just of pain, but of redemption. Just as Cain's mark served a purpose, the experiences we endure can be reminders of God's grace and our ongoing spiritual growth. If you're intrigued by biblical mysteries and the profound lessons they teach, don't stop here. There's so much more to discover. Share your thoughts about the mark of Cain in the comments below. Do you think it was a physical sign or something deeper? And if you're ready to take your spiritual journey to the next level, check out our ebook, 30 Habits to Draw Closer to God. It's packed with practical insights to help you grow in faith and live a more fulfilling life. You'll find the link in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss out on more intriguing biblical content. Let's continue this exploration together and dive deeper into the mysteries that shape our faith. Remember, the path to understanding God's truth is a lifelong journey, and every step brings us closer to His wisdom.